Weather experts say Cyclone Idai has downgraded, meaning the downpours experienced over the past 4 days have receded, but the weather conditions in the morning remained rickety, improving later on in the day to pave way for rescue missions for those marooned by the floods. The torrential rains made headlines both within and beyond Africa's borders.
Chimanimani district has been cut off from the rest of the country by torrential rains and winds of up to 170 kilometers per hour that have swept away homes, roads and bridges and knocked out power and communication lines.
Authorities say it's the worst flooding in decades, and experts are linking the storms to climate change.
Some people ran to a police camp which was near this area for safety, but the water was too powerful and swept many of them away.
Right now, you can see that all across this region of Mozambique. The country's infrastructure ripped up, obliterated, people's lives pulled apart and destroyed.
Climate change is basically putting our weather system on steroids.
March 2019, one of the deadliest storms to hit the southern hemisphere made landfall in Zimbabwe. The ferocious waters moved without mercy in the eastern part of Zimbabwe, leaving a trail of destruction recorded as one of the lethal damages to be recorded in the nation's history. I experienced the deadly torrential rains that pounded Chimanimani and Chipenge. My heart torn apart as I moved on top of these huge boulders, some of which became permanent graves for many families. I watched the rising waters in Save River, Zimbabwe's largest internal river, as it burst its riverbanks, unable to contain the heavy rains from Cyclone Idai. There is a saying that still waters run deep, and what we are witnessing here at the Save River is just reflective of that saying. The huge volumes of water that occupy Save River right now are reflective of the downpours that were experienced due to Cyclone Idai. Houses destroyed, families trapped. This was a brutal way by nature to educate me on climate change. The fury of the torrential rains was not only felt in Zimbabwe. Its neighboring sisters Mozambique and Malawi also paid the heavy price. Combined, the southern part of Africa lost over 1,000 lives, while over 300,000 people were displaced, according to official estimates from humanitarian agencies.
Tinosiziye cyclone inoti yauya inombete mazuva yechinaya yozohodhore dzimba yakati nezuva rimwe
ndane ngoni munganhasi raro chito chisi3 ichingorara pakashama soda
pakauye dutu mupengo imhepo yakanga yakakura ikatora imba marata akaiswa kure mudhuri ukadonha wemba mukati makanga mune vana nemudzimai.
My name is Theophilus Chuma, an investigative journalist working in Zimbabwe. Over the past 3 years since Cyclone Idai hit Zimbabwe, Mozambique and Malawi, I have researched on the intensity of this phenomenon that has seriously exposed Southern Africa to drought and extreme destruction. On the 30th of January 2020, the Southern Africa Development Community Executive Secretary, Her Excellency Dr. Stegomana Lawrence Tax, raised the red flag over the destructive impact of climate change on the SADC region, saying, open quotes, "In view of the increased frequency and scale of the climate change-related catastrophes, such as cyclones and droughts in the SADC region, the region reiterates its call for joint global efforts to mitigate climate change by stepping up efforts to enhance adaptive capacities of developing countries in line with the spirit of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, close quote. Cyclones are now an albatross issue for the region. A 2019 synthesis report on the state of food and nutrition security and vulnerability issued by SADC just after the destructive cyclone Idai stated the tropical rains destroyed close to 780,000 hectares of standing crops in Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. It is estimated close to 42 million people in 13 SADC states were food insecure. Since then, the continued impact and frequency of cyclones on the region have pushed this figure by another 17 million. Thompson Piri is the World Food Programme Africa Communications Chief. He says they are concerned over this crisis which is facing the region.
We are at the sharp end of the climate crisis in Southern Africa because of geography. We are facing episodes of droughts, we are facing floods, we have cyclone seasons in Madagascar going through the Mozambique Channel. It's devastating. 59 million people do not know where their next meal will come from in Southern Africa today. This is the peak of the hunger season, and that's a hunger season that is chiefly being aggravated by the changing climate. Can we change the effects of climate change? No. We have to contend with what we have today, and we have to deal with mitigation. We need to invest more and more, scale up, ramp up our responses to a changing climate. It is no longer climate change. It is now a climate crisis.
The development of the region is now under severe stress. Livelihoods are worsening, displacements doubling, while nutrition is now squeezed to the limits.
As the World Food Programme, we are working and helping people to prepare for disasters. We are helping people to respond to disasters. And we are helping to make sure that we also prevent the extreme versions of crisis in Southern Africa. How are we doing this? We are introducing climate smart agriculture. We are boosting people's resilience so that they can withstand shocks when they happen to them. We know that every 2 years, every year, we are going to face cyclones in Mozambique. We know there's going to be flooding in Malawi. We know there's going to be drought episodes in Zimbabwe.
Climate change is a dark reality for Southern Africa, casting a dark shadow not only on food security but also posing serious risk on peace and security. When the vulnerability aspects are projected to 2050, hotspots are evident in the high exposure and lower adaptive capacity areas in southern and central Angola and parts of western DRC. Central eastern regions covering southern Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, southern and central Mozambique remain hotspots according to a research conducted by Climate Diplomacy. Heavy flooding is testimony to this phenomenon. Images such as these recorded in South Africa's Mpumalanga province paint a gloomy outlook for the region. On this documentary, I work with the Director of News and Current Affairs at the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, Albert Chekai, to engage South African climate change expert Tanisha Phillips.
We're seeing Southern Africa being hit by some of these cyclones, and we know that some of these weather phenomena are sort of natural, like your La Nina or your, what is the other one? El Nino.
El Nino, yes.
El Nino, yes. And we're we go through these climatic cycles, and right now we are in La Nina, and we know it brings much more cold and wetness. But what the science is saying is that these natural weather phenomena are sort of being heavily impacted by global warming. And what that means is that even though we might have still had a cyclone, the intensity of that cyclone is going to be much worse as a result of climate change.
The predicament facing SADC is raising alarm bells among authorities. Without proper financing, the region's capacity to adapt to the changing weather patterns is severely depleted. Policy frameworks targeting to address climate-related security risks are now an urgent priority for the region, while accelerating the SADC adaptation policy is needed now more than ever, according to the United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator to Zimbabwe, Dr. Edward Kalon.
Zimbabwe is prone to climate-induced emergencies. These are going to be here for some time. So all what is required is to make sure that the country is prepared to respond if they occur at any point in time. But the international community should also be ready to support these climate-induced disasters so that the countries that are affected don't carry the full burden of the impact.
It's farmers like Watson Mutero in Zimbabwe and many like him across the SADC region whose futures hang in the balance. If the rains fail him, it means all his efforts will become just but a boulevard of broken dreams.
Zvakutova kuti murimi agare asingaverenge mvura. Mvura yakaira yatongoti kana yachinge yatongokupromisa kuti ndauya wana something zvaunoita in time. Kana ukwanisa kunge wabata mwaka iwoyo zvokwanisa kuti zvikuendere nekuti mvura yacho yakuti kana yapano neapo pano neapo kana dzamara kutongosiyana nayo zvako zvatoramba kubhadhara. Saka ichenjedzo mari kumurimi wokuti kana uchinge wakwanisa kuwana kuti mvura yatombokwanisa kunge yauyawo ishandise nenguva iyoyo.
Understanding the region's ecological vulnerability is critical given the high statistics of people who are now exposed to food insecurity.
What we need to do now is to make sure that people are better prepared to withstand the shocks. When it hits, people should be able to withstand that shock. People should still be able to find food. People, even when there's a flood, we expect people to grow food varieties that can actually outpace the levels of flood waters. We've seen this happening in other areas. We need science, we need universities, we need research institutions, of course being led by the governments in SADC and by SADC Secretariat themselves. The UN is here to stay and is here to partner with governments to ensure that we withstand all these calamities.
SADC countries, our sub-Saharan countries, really need to ensure first that they have the enabling environment, the requisite policies, strategies, plans to ensure that with a proper adaptation plan, countries can be more proactive, they can plan well in advance and also mainstream climate change in their development planning so that climate change is budgeted for in all the sectoral budgets of each and every ministry, department, and agency of the ministries. Over and above local government is very critical in terms of implementing, especially the issues to do with losses and damages, because they happen within the local authorities. So, as government here in Zimbabwe, we are coming up with a program to ensure that we capacitate local government to be ready to receive financing for loss of damage, because this financing will not come just easily.
Yet food security is just but one area which the region has to protect. The current energy crisis that has forced South Africa, Zambia and Zimbabwe into serious load shedding is another wake-up call for the region to critically look at investing in renewable energy. At the center of the coordination, the region should also emphasize on improving climate resilience to better prepare vulnerable communities.
We are already implementing. We've been working in SADC for a very long time. But what we are doing now in SADC is to make sure that we strengthen early warning. We have learned so much from the Maputo Declaration following the African Union Summit that prioritizes and places front and center early warning and disaster management. We are working with all the governments in the region to make sure that they have not only policies but also resources to be able to respond when disaster strikes. We are working with government at various levels, at policy level, at implementation level, at various levels, various arms of government. We are all trying to do something for climate change. And like I said, we are at the sharp end of the climate disaster. And what we can do now is to make sure that we adapt and that we are resilient, because this is here to stay.
Enhancing early warning systems is pivotal to safeguard communities and save lives.
We need to step up investments in adaptation. We cannot change. We have to contend with what we have now. We need to step up, and as the United Nations World Food Programme, most of our programs are responding to climate, and most of our programs are being designed with a changing climate in mind. We are looking at climate change as a force. The climate crisis that I hear, it is going to be a misery multiplier unless we step up. However, it is not only the United Nations that needs to step up. We need as well the host governments to step up, to allocate resources. If there's anything that we can learn from the COVID-19 virus and the ensuing response that took place since 2019, is that concerted efforts from all the players that is decisive in a very short space of time can get us results. We are going to need some of that with the climate crisis.
The Southern African Development Community, SADC, recognizes the importance of a coordinated approach to tackling the climate change crisis. The 15-year SADC Climate Change Adaptation Strategy and Action Plan, developed in 2015, is one of the pivotal blueprints prioritizing strategic interventions and actions given the associated vulnerability of the region to climate change. The Climate Change Adaptation Strategy and Action Plan, which runs until 2030, emphasizes on adaptation and mitigation. Focus areas are divided into, among other sectors, building resilience around agriculture, biodiversity, human security, fisheries, land use, forestry, and many other sectors. Southern Africa, like the rest of the African region, struggles with carbon emissions resulting from the land use. The strategy therefore provides sustainable answers to cutting back on emissions on carbon and mitigate the harmful effects of climate change. It's now 7 years down the line and 8 years remaining. It's vital that member states revisit this document to fine-tune their response mechanisms. 2 cyclones in the early months of 2022 is another wake-up call for the region on the course that the region is headed if the current gaps are not addressed. There's also need for the region to look at ways of protecting one of its most vulnerable member states, Madagascar, where every intense storm originates before it takes over other SADC African nations. Experts agree that improving early warning systems for the region's most vulnerable island is critical to protect the lives of thousands of its residents.